Hello. So I really wanted to show a method for language study that we used in second year Greek. Uh, and the reason that I wanted to show this is because it's not a method that is used or advocated today. In fact, it's very uh, uh, heavily spoken against. But I really think that it does have value. I think there are times when it is beneficial. And so I wanted to show it and maybe talk about it a little bit. Um, I have studied uh, dead languages, including ancient Greek, ancient Hebrew, and Latin, as well as living languages, including Russian, modern Greek, modern Hebrew, German, maybe enough French to count. Well, so little bits of lots of languages, as well as studied vast amounts of language theory, including taking um, language education courses and actually teaching for student teaching. I taught Russian just a little bit, not like a full, not full student teaching. I think they still call it student teaching. It was just like once a week for an hour a week. Basically, I did that twice. Anyway, so I have a little bit of say background and interest in language learning, language theory. I've done mostly self-learning on my own and tried basically every different language learning method you could try to see what works, what doesn't work, and obviously it's very personal. It depends on the person, how the person's brain works, what the person would be interested in. But it also depends on what you want to get out of the language and what you want to use it for, and that's fits right into this method here. So, um, in college, I took 3 years of Koine Greek, which is basically Bible Greek, and let's see, the pronunciation they use is different from the modern Greek pronunciation, and it's how to say this? It was contrived in by Erasmus whenever he was, so I don't know, maybe 1400s or 1700s, somewhere in there, because they know that the modern Greek pronunciation was not the same as the Greek pronunciation of the past, and so they kind of tried to reconstruct the pronunciation of the past based on poetry and different things like that, where you can reasonably predict how the letters should have sounded. So there's a lot of changes. I found, though, that to me, the Erasmian pronunciation sounds very robotic, and I prefer to just use modern Greek pronunciation, and it feels more like a language, and I find it easier to learn. Plus, it creates a nice bridge between Koine Greek and modern Greek because they're similar enough that you can um, anything you learn in the one will help you in the other, especially if you just stick with modern Greek pronunciation. So anyway, that's about my pronunciation. As for this learning method, in a dead language, you're not really learning it to communicate. So most of the things that today the big push in language learning is to focus on communication, basically comprehensive input. Pretty sure that comes from Krashen, this guy's last name. Anyway, the main theory that is held by most, especially Western linguists and language learners and language educators, is this idea of comprehensible input, the idea that language is a skill, that you use it, that you, yeah, the best way to learn a language is to have a situation where you want to use it and need to use it, and then to just use it, whether it's reading, writing, listening, speaking. So I believe that that is the ideal way in general for a modern language, but I think that this method that I'm about to present can be helpful for a modern language. When I say that, I really believe that it would be helpful, but I don't think it should take over for uh, the basically comprehensible input. Um, it should be used rarely, I think, in most cases. So maybe once a year you sit down and do something like this. It wouldn't be necessary to do it often or even helpful to do it often. In a dead language, on the other hand, your goal is really not to communicate, it is just to understand, usually. So you only need to focus on understanding. That's one thing. A second thing is that your goal, uh, the idea of translating in your head from the ancient language to your native language is not as harmful as it is when trying to use a modern language for communication. There could still be some setbacks and drawbacks, but it's not going to hinder you as much as if you're trying to communicate in a modern language. So I think that's kind of point number two. Point number three is really key. So in language study, it's easy to get to where you can, for the most part, understand what is being communicated. And that's really the push in modern language studies, again, in Western societies, is that you should focus on basically getting the gist, getting the idea of what is said, and not worry so much if you miss some of the details along the way. The trouble is, usually people, when they study ancient languages, the whole point of using the language is to argue, to not necessarily argue in a bad way, but to argue like to build logical foundation off of that language, right? And so, say when I study Bible Greek, I want to be able to make intelligent English arguments from the Greek language. Well, you can't just have this like sort of superficial foreigner type understanding of the language. You need to have a really deep understanding of what's going on so that you don't come up with erroneous conclusions. Okay? I've found that after studying Russian for quite a long time and I can communicate relatively well in it, I have a very hard time. Like, if I were to try to debate, I would just be utterly terrible because I don't understand the nuances enough for a debate situation. Okay, so this is kind of a shortcut if you're not concerned with communicating but more concerned with debating. I think that this method can be helpful in that situation. And so we're kind of going to go over this text and roughly with this idea that we used in my second year Greek class. Okay, so, and I'm going to use modern Greek pronunciation. This is Apocalypsis Ioannou. So this is from the book of Revelation. It's the first 5 verses of chapter 5, as you can see. We're actually only going to go through the first verse because this is a very time-consuming and tedious way for language study. So just the first verse is going to take plenty long enough. But first I'll just read the text. Και είδαν επί την δεξιάν του κατημένου, επί του θρόνου, βιβλίαν γεγραμμέναν έσωθεν και όπισθεν κατεσφραγισμέναν φραγίσιν επτά. Και είδαν άγγελαν ισχυρών κηρύσσαντα εν φωνή μεγάλη. Της άξιας άνοιξε το βιβλίαν και λύσε τας φραγίδας αυτού. Και ουδείς εδύνατα εν το ουρανό ουδέ επί της εις ουδέ υπακάτω της εις άνοιξε το βιβλίαν ούτε βλέπειν αυτό. Και έκλαιαν πάλι ότι ουδείς άξιας εφρέτη άνοιξε το βιβλίον ούτε βλέπειν αυτό. Και εις εκ των πρεσβυτέρων λέγει μη κλαίε, ιδού ενίκησεν αλεόν αεκ της φυλής Ιούδα, η ρίζα Δαβίδ, άνοιξε το βιβλίον και τας επτά σφραγίδας αυτού. Okay, so probably many people didn't understand any of what I said. But if we go through this first verse here, so basically in my course we just had these columns, right? And this is more or less what we did. This has been like 10 years ago, so I don't remember exactly. But we took the textual form. So this column is just each word of the text as it appears in the text. Then we did the part of speech, then the conjugation, because Greek is very, especially Koine Greek, this is one of the differences. Modern Greek has a little bit less in the way of conjugations or in the way of conjugation importance. It's still there, way more than English, but it's a little less than Koine Greek, which I believe is a little bit less than Ancient Greek. So it's kind of one of those things that was smoothed out over the centuries. But anyway, it's incredibly important in Koine Greek. So conjugation, lexical form, the way it would appear in a dictionary, and a rough English gloss of the lexical form. And then something that I added over here at the end. And something I'm missing that our professor would have had us do was we would have had to have pull out key grammatical information in another column. So like from, who did we use? Wallace's New Testament Greek grammar. Anytime some interesting, very detailed grammatical thing came up, we had to put that in another column and explain what it was. So like KTS construction and whatever else. I don't remember most of those things, as well as naming types of genitive case usage and types of dative usage. Anyway, to me that was a little overkill and not so necessary, so I left that out. So let's go with the first word. The first word is K. It's a conjunction and it means and. The next word is idan. It's a verb. It parses as aorist active indicative first person singular, which if you're not familiar with Greek, I can't go over all of that obviously, but basically the first three words are just telling you, we'll say what type of verse it is, type of verb it is. That's going to be the only way I can explain that short, I think. And the next two words are the how it relates to the nouns, I guess. So first person singular. So this would be is a first person verb. So the only noun that it can take as a subject would be like I, ego, and it is singular, so it can only take nouns in the singular, which again would be I, as opposed to the plural, which would be we. So yeah, the lexical form harao, and the gloss would be I see. In English, we would normally say to see, but the lexical form in Greek is the form with the. It's not the infinitive form. It's the first person form. So I see. Next word, epi, is a preposition. It's in this case the prepositional form that takes the accusative, which could change the form of the noun. Will change the meaning of the preposition. So this is a preposition with the accusative. Lexical form is irrelevant because it doesn't change, and roughly the word can mean upon or towards. Now with prepositions, there's probably a lot of other meanings for this, but I just wrote down a couple. Tin is a feminine article. It's accusative feminine singular. So this is the first noun we get to. So accusative, Greek has, let's see, Russian has 6 cases. I think Greek has 4 cases. Koine Greek has 4 cases for nouns. They're nominative, genitive, dative, accusative. And just to give the rough idea, they have a lot of more nuances than this, but basically the nominative is the sentence or the stock form of the word without any other grammatical markings. Genitive, one of the most frequent uses is possession. Dative, one of the most frequent uses is indirect object. And accusative is most commonly used as the object of a verb. So basically they represent uses of the word, but they also represent forms of the word. So here I'm just referring to the form mainly. So teen is an accusative form, so it can do things that an accusative form verb noun can do, or well, article in this case. Yeah, so it's feminine and it is singular. So if it goes with any other words, those words are also going to be accusative feminine singular. The lexical form is he, which means she. Dexian is an adjective. It's accusative feminine singular. Notice that it matches with the article that goes with it. That's how you know they go together. Them being beside each other is a good clue. So up here, tin dexian. But in Greek, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that they go together. You have to also watch the form. because they could have words in between them. So dexios would be the lexical form, and it means right, as in right hand, or right as opposed to left, so right side, that kind of right. Tu is an article. It's a genitive masculine singular. Lexical form is ha, and it means he. Katimenu is a participle. Participles are the the big troublemaker for any Greek student, because participles are just very challenging. There's so many forms to them. They really can do a lot. Basically, a participle is halfway a verb and halfway a noun. In English, I'm not as good with English grammar. I'm actually much better at Greek grammar because I studied 3 years of it in English grammar. I haven't done since high school really, but basically, I don't know for sure if we have participles. I think we do, or we have gerunds, and gerunds are close to participles, but not exactly the same. So the idea of running. So, or let's see. Oh, what would be a good example sentence in English? Well, here's one. It's I hit the ground running. So that is either a participle or a gerund or both in English, but it's a similar type of word. And so run is a verb, but running is being used as an adverb to describe hit. So it's describing how you hit the ground, even though normally it would be a verb. When you add this ing in this case, it's changing the part of speech of that verb. So participle is kind of like that. It's built off of a verb, but you're changing the part of speech, but they can do more things than the English equivalent. They're a lot more nuanced and involved than the English equivalent. So it's basically halfway a noun, halfway a verb. They can work like adjectives, they can work like adverbs. Yeah. So katimenu is a participle. In this case, the parsing is also terrible for these. Present middle participle, that's basically the verb half of it. And I didn't talk much about verbs because again, that's going to be outside of the scope of this video. So just know that this is kind of helping you know how the verb end of it is working. Then genitive masculine singular, that's the noun half of it. That's the noun parsing. The lexical form is katime, and the word katime means I am sitting. Next word, epi. It's preposition plus accusative. It means upon and or towards, or many other meanings. Tu is an article, genitive masculine singular, ha and he. Thronu, this is a noun. The noun is genitive masculine singular, genitive case, masculine gender, singular in number. Thronas is the root form. Throne is what that root form means. So Viblion is a noun. It's either nominative or accusative depending on context. The form between the two is exactly the same here. It's neuter and it's singular. Viblion and it's book. Kegramenan is another participle. It's conjugates as perfect passive participle, nominative or accusative, neuter, singular. The root form is grapho, and it means I am writing. We're almost done here. Esothen is an adverb. These things are irrelevant, and it means inside. Ke is a conjunction. Again, these two columns are irrelevant. It means and. Opisthen is an adverb. It means outside or backside. I don't have my good Greek lexicon at the moment, and the one that I looked up said outside, but from what I remember of the text in English, I think, well, it said backside, sorry, but from what I remember of the text in English, I believe they normally would translate it as outside. It's one of those, it's somewhere along those lines, and it won't actually end up making a difference for our understanding of the sentence, because once we get to that part, the understanding is very clear. Kates phraismenon is a participle. It parses as present passive participle, that's kind of the verb half of it. Accusative neuter singular, that's the noun half. Katasphragizo and it means I am sealing. Two more words. Sfraisin is a noun. It is dative feminine plural. So here's our, I think this is our first plural word. It's feminine in gender, and the dative, it's dative case, and so again, it's probably used as an indirect object. There's many other uses for the dative, but that's kind of probably one of the first ones you would want to learn. Sfrais is the root form, and it means seal. Then epta is a numeral, which I didn't know how to parse this. I looked it up, and it said it doesn't parse, which is interesting to me. I don't know about all their numbers, but apparently epta does not parse, and it means 7. Okay, so oh, it moved this way over here. I had the sentence written above it. I didn't realize it moved it over. So the sentence that we were just looking at was Keidan epitindexian tu katimenu epitothronu vivlian gegramenan esoten ke opisten katesphreismenan phreisin epta. And below it I have written, I have to make this a little smaller. I have written out the, oh, I'm going to have to make it a lot smaller. Hopefully you can still read that. Oops. So I wrote out the sentence, but I broke it up into phrases and clauses. And this isn't something that we had to do in my Greek class. It's something that I got from another intermediate level Greek book that I had read, and I find it very useful. That's way too small. Okay, well, unfortunately that's, hopefully you can still read that. So the first part we have here, keidan, is we begin our independent clause here. So the whole independent clause, I think, should be the entire sentence, if I'm correct. Keidan epi tindexian tu katimenu epitothronu vivlian gegramenan esoten ke opisten katesphraismenan phreisin epta. Yeah, this keidan, this is our main verb. This is our verb for the entire independent clause that we have, and the entire independent clause happens to be the entire sentence. So everything after this fits under this, with this. The next thing that we have here, epitindexian, is a prepositional phrase. It's modifying the verb. This is how I understood it, or maybe the direct object. I wasn't really sure because from my memory in my head of English translations, I think sometimes they take epitindexian as memorizing modifying vivlian, the direct object. So that would mean epitindexian would be like either on the right, or I think it could mean in the right hand, which is why I thought it could be modifying vivlian, because I thought in English translations they said and I saw like in the right hand of like a book, so like the thing that's in the right hand would be the book, or it seems to me that it could also mean on the right side. I'd have to like look up better to know whether either one of those, maybe both of those are correct, or there is only one of those two that's correct. Again, it's not going to make a difference for like really for the main meaning of the text, but off the top of my head, so otherwise it could mean keidan is I saw, epitindexian, so this could mean on the right side. Actually, I think this should be modifying this. Anyway, it's a little bit difficult and subjective sometimes to do this part of it, but I still think it's the most helpful for actually trying to understand the text. Tukatimenu means like of him who is seated, basically. It's a rough, off the top of my head, English gloss. Tukatimenu, and I believe this is a noun phrase. I'm sure of that. Tukatimenu. It's a genitive. So okay, when I say I'm sure of that, I don't necessarily mean that would be the most grammatically proper way to say it, but of the terms that I know, if it does accurately fit what's happening here. Tu katimenu, I believe we had that as a participle, but it is the participle here is acting, I guess you would say adjectively, but more of a, in a more English mindset, it's working as a noun phrase. So noun phrases are phrases built from nouns that modify things. So they can modify things. Let's see. I think as adjectives, maybe, or as adverbs, maybe just as adjectives. Anyway, tu katimenu. So like this would be the one who is seated. So this is saying where. Either saying tu katimenu. I should go back and look actually at. That's why this part's helpful. Tu katimenu was masculine. Vivlion is neuter, so those can't go together. So it can't be that like the book was seated, it should be the one who is seated. So this is describing a person who is seated. So keidan is like I saw, in this case it's John speaking. So John saw epitin dexian in the right hand, which I'm not really sure which one it's supposed to go with yet. Tukatimenu, so that should be of him who is seated. And this would be, well, I think in English, I guess it would be used. It would be a prepositional phrase in English because we would say um, of him who is seated. But here it's I guess you could say participle phrase. I'm not really sure. I want to use the word phrase, but yeah. Anyway, so epituthronu would be the tukatimeno. So this has to be on the throne. So actually, yeah, so this epituthronu is modifying tukatimenu, meaning that it's clarifying, describing, giving more information about whatever it is speaking to this phrase, tukatimenu. So epituthronu says on the throne, and it is saying, it is describing this one who is seated, it is saying where the one who is seated. So tukatimenu, epituthronu, Vivlian. Vivlian goes all the way back to I saw. It is the direct object. It was in the accusative case, so it is the direct object. Let's make sure. Tukatimeno. Yeah, it has to be. It's the direct object of idan. So if you ask the question, what did John see? He would say, I saw a book. Keidan Vivlian. And that is a perfectly grammatical sentence. So modifiers can be left out and you will still have a perfectly grammatical sentence. And you can also have a sentence with the same meaning. So keidan Vivlian, that's like I saw a book. It can mean the same. You could, let's say I saw a book in the right hand of someone seated on a throne. I could just say I saw a book and it would be true to the situation, or I could give more information and say like I saw a book in the right hand. Okay, so the right hand does go with katimenu. So keidan epitin dexian, this is actually clarifying to katimenu, which are really both clarifying Vivlian book. So I saw keidan epitin dexian is answering more information about the direct object, which hasn't come yet. Tukatimenu is answering more information about the direct object, which hasn't come yet. And Επί του θρόνου is answering more information about του καθημένου. Yeah. Anyway, and so it's nice to lay it out kind of visually, although it's a little bit arbitrary sometimes about how to lay it out visually because there's no perfect way to fit everything into some scheme that works for every sentence. But when you kind of lay it out visually, I think it really helps. And the last couple of phrases, we have gegramenon, which is again a participle. It's an adjectival participle modifying, well, actually it should be, yeah, adjectival modifying the direct object. So vivlian, meaning book, was the direct object. Gegramenon is means written, basically, like written as an adjective. So gegramenon, perfect passive participle. In this case, it's going to be accusative because it's going with vivlian, which was the direct object of the main verb. So that's accusative, so this has to be accusative. Neuter is singular. Yeah. So vivlian, again, is the direct object, meaning book. Gegramenon means like written. We can't like use the same grammatical form in English, but it's describing that the book has writing on it, basically. Esothen, que opisthen. This is saying where the writing is, which is why I said opisthen, which meant like backside or outside. It's not going to make any difference because it's pretty clear. One is inside, esothen, and the other one is clearly meant to be the opposite of the inside. So whatever you want to call the opposite of the inside of a book is what opisthen clearly means. So biblion, gegramenon, book with writing on the inside and outside, and katisphraismenon means it's again an adjectival participle modifying the direct object vivlion. So gegramenon is describing some more details about vivlion, saying that the book has writing. Katisphraismenon is describing more information about vivlion, saying that the book is sealed, that it has seals, that it is sealed. And it's an adjectival participle. And this sphragisin epta, 7 seals. I don't want to say describing. Maybe object actually would have been better. I said noun phrase and numeral modifying participle. I think probably I should have said noun phrase acting as the object of the participle katisphraismenon, because it is like, or maybe, well, we would say with, but I think object is still correct. So it is sealed with seals. So this seals are the things being acted on by this participle katisphraismenon. So anyway, there's kind of a little way to break down Greek, and just you could use it for other languages too. I'm only able to use it for Greek. I know a lot more about Russian than Greek, but I haven't studied Russian grammar well enough to be able to try to do something like this. It would just be way worse than my attempt at butchering the Greek language. So anyway, I just wanted to show that you could easily go along and do the same with the rest of the sentences, and you could do it for as long as you wanted, or ideally, probably, again, taking this back a step, where this would actually be useful. So a lot of times you can kind of tell when you're trying to read something if the language is very clear just from you trying to read it. So for example, if I try to read this, the first sentence would have been pretty clear to me just by reading it, because I know the definitions of the words, the grammatical structures are fairly simple. I can just tell what's going on when I just read the sentence. But some other sentences, actually even in here, I don't know whether it was like the third or the fourth sentence, probably both, the third and the fourth sentence. So there's several vocabulary words that off the top of my head I don't know there. Grammatical constructions. Maybe they're a little more complicated, honestly. I don't think there's any complicated grammatical structures here. It's John. John's not known for his complicated grammatical constructions, but anyway, you get the point. So one reason why I think this is beneficial is if you're trying to understand something that is exceptionally difficult to you as a reader in either style or vocabulary to an extent. Obviously, if it's vocabulary is the only problem, you can just look up the vocabulary. But if grammatically it's not making sense, trying to really analyze the grammar can help. Another thing could be how, say how, basically what level of education the writing is intended for. And this actually can easily apply to the Bible. So certain writers in the Greek New Testament wrote in a simpler style. Those include definitely John. Anything written by John is basically the easiest thing to understand compared to the other writings in there. Mark and Matthew are also not too bad. So other writings that would include probably, I'd say, more of a, it's hard to say which ones would be a middle style, but if I just try to say which ones are definitely harder, a lot of the writings of Paul, Hebrews, and anything written by Luke are in a very, just much more difficult style of writing, and you can easily tell when you try to look at it and try to start to understand it. Like, if I could read everything that John wrote perfectly fine, straight through, no problems, and understand it, I could still get to something written by Luke and be completely lost. And this is not just true in the Bible, this is true. So if I pick up a children's book, and maybe my level of reading in English is good enough to understand a children's book, it doesn't mean I'm going to be able to pick up some master's thesis on some topic and understand it, because the style of writing, the level of writing is very different. All that to say, this method, I think, is more beneficial to particularly difficult styles of writing. I think it's also beneficial to moments where some very important understanding hinges on a very accurate understanding of sentences, I don't know what I want to say, of a section, of a short section of writing. So a paragraph, a sentence, a clause, whatever. When you have some very profound, deep, important thing that you're understanding from that passage, and you really need to be sure that you're understanding it correctly because it has important implications, which is easy to think about in reference to the Bible, but it could also be true in other situations as well. Say for some technical manual or something like that, and you're trying to send a rocket to the moon. Let's say I'm working on a space project and I'm collaborating with Russia, and my Russian is well about as good as my Russian is right now, and I'm trying to read this important document so that we can plan things for the trip. I'm really going to have to spend a little more time analyzing the text than I would if I were just trying to have a casual conversation with a Russian speaker about who I am, what I like to do, where I live, the basics of conversation. So anyway, yeah, I just thought I would show this method a little bit and both kind of talk about and teach a little bit of Greek in more of a, say, from a text way as opposed to from the normal starting position, and also kind of show this method at the same time that I think has some value that is underappreciated, I think, in our day.